空英才艺媒体营开始报名喽！7月共2批次，3天打造媒体精兵，5月5号前享早鸟价，详情请洽空英商城。现在请收听教学节目。
Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Shrimptastic delights from the laboratory to your kitchen table today on Advanced. Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Welcome back to Advanced Radio. I am your host, David. Today is May 3rd, 2021, and we are on day 1 of our 3-day food article, Shrimply Delicious. I am joined here by 2 fantastic panelists who are going to really make this program come alive. If I can have you guys introduce yourselves now.
Hey, David, this is Hannah. Excited to be back talking about food, one of my favorite topics.
Oh, yeah.
And my name is Garrett. Not just talking about food, but what food might look like in the future. This is an exciting one.
Yeah, it is very cool. It's got a lot of implications for medicine as well, and in terms of what could be happening in the medical field in the future. We'll get into that later on as we find out the mystery of what it is our subject will be for the day. Now, since Garrett kind of hinted at what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the future of food. Right, and leading into that, because we'll be talking about some pretty interesting, new things that they're trying to do these days. But before we get into that, I would like to ask you guys: have you ever tried any meat substitutes? You know, like there are veggie burgers, there are those Impossible burgers. We've had advanced articles about that kind of stuff in the past. So, what is some of your experience with meat substitutes?
Well, for me, David, one of my first foods was really a meat substitute because growing up, my grandparents were vegetarian. We would go over to their house often after church on Sundays and have lunch with them. And we'd always have vegetarian sausages. Whatever meal we were having, it did not matter. There was always vegetarian sausages on the table. And I grew up just thinking that's what sausages taste like.
Wow.
Because that's what we had. And so it's a very nostalgic kind of childhood meal for me whenever I can find vegetarian sausages.
How did they taste?
I don't know. Great. They're based on soy, so a soy product. And I don't know, not meaty really, but just kind of unique.
Okay.
I think I've had that before. I think it was pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
How about you, Garrett?
Yeah, I feel like this is something that has changed over the years. I think our conceptions of meat substitutes a long time ago was maybe a giant chunk of tofu, kind of made to look slightly like meat, but it can't really replace it. Of course, tofu can be a very delicious thing, but not necessarily when you try and make it to be meat. But there are, of course, lots of new things like the Impossible burgers, or you have Beyond Meat, another company doing those things. I haven't had any of those, but I have had plant-based kind of ground pork, often made into dumplings here in Asia. And I wasn't a fan of it. I think that product, it didn't taste very good. I could see it being a really good thing in the future, but I think they have a little ways to go, if you will.
For sure. Yeah, I think a lot of my experience with plant-based meats or meat substitutes came from a time in my life where I was living with some vegetarians. I was living with some people. One of them was vegan, which means that they ate no animal products whatsoever, right? And the other was vegetarian. And we would kind of take turns cooking in our house. So on different days, we wouldn't really always be cooking for each other, obviously, because we weren't all vegetarian, right? We weren't all meat eaters, but we would share food. We were all open, more so me being open to what they were cooking, right? So there are a couple of opportunities that I had to eat some of the foods that they made, and they would use some of the meat substitutes. They would use kind of the tofu meat products, even special kind of prepared lunch meats and stuff like that are made from tofu. And I always thought it was pretty good. And these days they're getting better and better, and even to the point where they're really trying to make meat substitutes, taste like meat, which I think is an interesting market because if it's someone who's vegetarian, then they don't want to eat meat, right? So why would they want to eat something that tastes like meat? But I think they're also trying to encourage people to just eat less meat because of some of the environmental implications. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening in this field. And this particular project is contributing to that world of kind of finding alternatives to some of the practices that are used to produce meat, I think. So this is very much a environmental bend to this kind of stuff, although that has concerns too because how much energy does this sort of process take? Anyway, the title of our article is Shrimply Delicious. What does shrimply mean, Garrett?
Well, it's a fun word here. Of course, the word that we would normally see is simply delicious. Something, it's not complicated, it's just delicious. But, of course, we're talking about shrimp today, so we have this fun word, shrimply.
That's right, exactly. We're talking about tech, food, and tasty treats. Again, it's a 3-day, we're going to be spending 3 days talking about this. The first 2 days are going to be this one particular article. Hannah, what's the name of that article?
So our first article is about the first lab-grown meat for sale that could come from this Singapore startup that's recreating shrimp.
That's right. This is going to be very interesting. It's going to be a little bit technical. We'll do our best to kind of break it down and make it, break it down into bite-sized portions, you could say.
Good one.
Hey. So why don't we go into our first reading? It's going to be the left-hand side of page 12 and then the first half of the next section, Endless Possibilities. So let's jump into that now.
Shrimply delicious. Tech, food, and tasty treats. The first lab-grown meat for sale could come from this Singapore startup that's recreating shrimp. In an industrial corner of Singapore, multiplying steadily in bioreactors, heated precisely to 82 degrees Fahrenheit, real shrimp meat is being grown from samples of the crustacean's microscopic cells. Fed a nutrient-rich soup meant to mimic its diet in the wild, a single cell can reproduce over 1 trillion times into a mound of gray translucent flesh. Think of it as meat growing without all the other parts of the animal, including that chalky black vein. The venture is being led by Sandhya Sriram and a team of scientists who are attempting to upend one of the cornerstones of dim sum. Sriram's company, Siok Meats, is named after Singaporean slang used to declare something delicious. Endless possibilities. Siok's finished product possesses the texture of ground shrimp and has already been tested to make siu mai, the Cantonese dim sum mainstay with the yellow dumpling wrapper. But its applications are potentially manifold in Chinese cuisine. You could layer a dollop of it over a raft of tofu, steam it, and douse it with a slightly sweeter soy sauce. It could be squeezed out of a piping bag into a simmering hot pot broth. And it might be the kind of thing you'd want to roll into balls, bread, and deep fry.
Garrett, what can you tell me about bioreactors?
Ooh, well, not much. I'm not a scientist over here, but it is a machine that's used in labs. We have 2 parts there. Bio, of course, talks about life, biology, and a reactor, something that is creating reactions. And so this is used in this company that we're talking about today.
That's right. And Hannah, what is it that seems to be incubating or growing in these bioreactors?
Well, it's real shrimp meat.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about substitutes for meat, like made of plants. In this case, they're actually growing real parts of shrimp.
Yeah. Yeah. Specifically, the part that you eat. Yeah, the part that you can eat. We'll get into that if we go on in our article. But yes, we see here real shrimp meat is being grown from samples of the crustacean's microscopic cells. Microscopic just means it's so small you can only see it through a microscope. And a crustacean is an animal with a hard shell and several pairs of legs. That includes shrimp, crabs, lobsters, all that good stuff that you want to see on the table of your wedding feast. All right. Now, what I find interesting here is that these microscopic cells are being fed this special solution, a nutrient-rich soup. Hannah, do you have any insights on this process of how these cells are grown and how they're fed?
Well, it's funny because when I read that line, I think they don't have mouths. How are they eating the soup?
Right.
I'm not too sure, to be honest, but I do know that this kind of soup or liquid solution they get to feed them is meant to mimic its diet in the wild. So whatever a shrimp would be eating in the ocean, they try to give it the same diet because obviously the meat we eat tastes the way it does because of the food it eats. So if they give it a kind of accurate diet, it will taste like real shrimp to us.
Yes, exactly. What you are what you eat, right?
Right.
Has a big impact on your health and apparently also the way that you taste. Don't think about that too much, people, when it comes to yourselves, but think about it with these shrimp. That's how you get that shrimp flavor. As we see here, it's meant to mimic its diet in the wild. Mimic just means to copy, to be the same as something else, right? And a single cell, and here's just one of the incredible miracles of life right here, a single cell can reproduce over 1 trillion times into a mound of gray, translucent, or you can almost see through it, but not quite. That's what translucent means. A mound of gray, translucent flesh. And this is just one of those incredible things about the way that our world is made. Even something as small as a cell has built within itself directions on how to make more of itself in such a way that it can create something larger. And it's that kind of incredibly just special creative energy that has been just put into every part of our bodies by our Creator. And that is one of the greatest things. It's something to be thankful for every day. Whenever you're stressed out about work and deadlines, just remember the Bible has this beautiful line, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made." Meaning that you, as a creation, that's right, you listening right now, you are amazing just in how you are made. So delight in the life that is in your lungs. Now, Garrett, we see here that they are not that when these cells are growing and they're reproducing, they're making this translucent kind of gray shrimp flesh, but they're not making every part of the shrimp, right?
Yeah, that's true. They're kind of just making the meat parts that we want to eat, and of course, this phrase "gray translucent flesh" doesn't sound very appetizing. It doesn't sound delicious, but that is kind of what a shrimp is like without its shell. When it cooks, it becomes that beautiful pinkish red, but it is very gray to begin with. And they also say here it's just the meat without the chalky black vein, which for me, as someone who likes to cook, is exciting because removing that vein is a real pain when you're cooking shrimp.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I know that you love cooking and I know that you've cooked shrimp before. How do you get that vein out, actually?
Well, there are fancy ways that take a long time to do it in a professional kitchen. You could probably cut it open with a knife and take it out. An easier way to do it at home would be with either a fork or a toothpick. You can kind of wedge it out.
And doing that for each individual shrimp that you're cooking has got to be a pain.
Yeah, and a lot of cuisines around the world don't bother with that. They'll just eat it straight up. You'll be fine if you eat it, but I don't enjoy it, so I tend to take it out.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of allergic to shrimp, actually, so I probably would... vein or no vein, I don't know that I would particularly enjoy it quite in the same way that other people would. But yeah, so that's the amazing thing about this process of growing the shrimp. Now, going on, this venture is being led by who, Garrett?
By Sandhya Sriram.
That's right. And a team of scientists who are attempting to upend one of the cornerstones of dim sum. If you have the cornerstone of something, what does it mean, Hannah?
It's like you kind of have control over it. It's like you're the biggest player in the market and you can kind of make the calls.
That's right. And to upend something is just to greatly affect it or upset it. So, and they call this they call shrimp one of the cornerstones of dim sum just because there are a lot of different dishes that use shrimp, right? So that means that a lot of shrimp are necessary in order to feed this habit that humans have of eating dim sum. So that means that if they're able to find other ways of producing shrimp, then that means that they would kind of maybe help with the overfishing problems that we've mentioned in other advanced articles. Now, Shriram's company, Shok Meats, is named after a Singaporean slang that's used to declare something delicious. I like that. I like that kind of going back to her roots with the name of her company. All right, now, here's the lady. Here's what she's trying to do. Now, we're going to get into the next section here, endless possibilities. We're going to start talking about, all right, so they've been hyping up this shrimp. We've learned a little bit about how it's made and what it is and who it is that's doing it. Now, what are they doing with it? All right, so how do they describe the texture of the shrimp, Garrett?
Yeah, it says it has the texture of ground shrimp, so chopped up really small, and it's already been tested to make some dishes, like a very popular dim sum dish called siomai.
Okay, have you ever made siomai?
I have not. Making dumplings is a very labor-intensive process, and not one that I have started to do yet.
Okay, but you're working on it, I'm sure. Hannah, how about you? Have you ever been to that place, Din Tai Fung?
Oh, yeah. I love that place.
Yeah, okay. Have you had their siomai?
You know, I just love their soup dumplings that I'd never order anything else.
Okay, all right. Well, I believe I've had dim sum once or twice before. I know I have had it before. I don't know that I certainly haven't had the shrimp siomai because if I eat those, bad things happen to me. But it is one of those just classic things. I remember getting dim sum in the States, and every time we got the dim sum, that was always a part of it. You got to get the siomai, right?
And it's delicious. It's a very classic shrimpy dish. It's got usually one full shrimp sitting on top. It's a very beautiful presentation.
Right. So what better way to test out this new shrimp, right, this new lab-grown shrimp, than to use it in this mainstay of Cantonese dim sum. But it's not, even though that's what they're starting off with in order to kind of see, like, since it's ground shrimp, right, it's easier to make something where the shrimp would be ground up, like in a dumpling or in a siomai. But the applications are potentially manifold in Chinese cuisine. Manifold here means that there are lots of different ways that you could use it. Now, we got a couple of words here that I would like to look at. We could layer a dollop of it over a raft of tofu. A dollop is almost like an ice cream scoop, right, Garrett?
Yeah, it could be. Usually it's scooping things that are almost pourable, maybe like it could be ice cream or yogurt, sour cream, something like that. Okay. And kind of it's an amount, like a scoopful.
All right. And how about a raft of tofu?
That's kind of a creative way to say it. I think they're almost picturing like a raft you would float down the river on, but a raft just means like maybe a big flat piece.
Okay, that makes sense, right? It's sort of like the shape of what it is, a raft of tofu. And you could steam it, you could douse it with a slightly sweeter soy sauce. There's a lot of things you can do with it. Squeeze it out of a piping bag. This makes me think of like decorating cakes.
Yeah, so a piping bag is usually used with like creams or frosting. You put it in a bag and you squeeze it out to make shapes or to cover a surface. Right. And there are very similar things in different kinds of Chinese or Cantonese cuisine with ground shrimp that you then squeeze out into a hot soup, boil it, and then eat it.
That's right. So just thinking about this, having this ability to make this kind of lab-grown ground shrimp, right? And we'll learn later on that they plan on doing other things with it too, not just making a ground version of the shrimp. But even just with what they've done so far, there are a lot of different applications because of just it being such an important part of Chinese cooking. You can even roll it into balls, bread it, and deep fry it. That sounds good to me. Deep fried anything's pretty good. All right, now we got another section here that was also quite interesting because we're going to start getting into some more of the applications that they have as this technology advances. So let's check that out now.
Eventually, Shriram would like to move beyond ground shrimp meat to produce crab, lobster, and a structured deshelled shrimp, one convincing enough to hang off the edge of a glass filled with cocktail sauce. "We can 3D print the tail if you want," she said. Singapore has emerged as a leading player in the budding technology once derided as Frankenmeat, after Dutch researcher Mark Bost unveiled the first test tube burger to a panel of food critics at a news conference in London 7 years ago. Researchers have been able to drive down the price of the meat, which is called cell-cultured meat or clean meat, from the nearly $300,000 it cost to produce Post's debut patty. Shok Shu Mai, for example, cost $300 a piece.
All right, so our doctor wants to move beyond the ground shrimp to produce crab, lobster, other crustaceans. As we talked about, those are all crustaceous animals. And she even wants to be able to make a structured de-shelled shrimp. That means a shrimp that looks like a shrimp, but without any of the bad parts, right? Without the shell also. And even is willing to 3D print the tail so that you can just pop that on the end so that the whole thing will just look like a shrimp, convincing enough to hang off the edge of a glass filled with cocktail sauce. It's a kind of a special dish. In the States, I know we have this in a lot of seafood restaurants called shrimp cocktail. It's oftentimes just shrimp with cocktail sauce. And sometimes they serve it in a cocktail glass, which is a glass that usually holds alcohol. So she's really her company is aiming for the stars. I mean, they're aiming for a pretty high goal. They want to make stuff that looks like the animal that they're kind of manufacturing, that they're growing in a lab. But I want to spend some more time talking about this idea of Frankenmeat. And so this budding technology of kind of lab-grown meat was once derided or kind of made fun of and laughed at as being Frankenmeat. What do they mean by that, Garrett?
Well, this comes from a great novel, great story about a doctor named Frankenstein who made a monster with different parts. And so that's where the idea comes from. It's putting different parts of things together to make something slightly unnatural.
Right. Hannah, how do you feel about eating cell-cultured meats? We kind of learned that they're called cell culture, just the growing of cells in a laboratory under these controlled conditions. That's cell-cultured, right? So this technology has come a long way. It started with the unveiling of the test tube burger, as it was called, to some food critics. But it seems to be something that a direction that food science is going in. How do you feel about cell-cultured meats?
I have mixed feelings because on the one hand, as you alluded to at the beginning of this article, it's kind of a growing need that our world has. Just in the fishing industry, there's a ton of carbon dioxide emitted when you're fishing. You're killing other animals and environments to make room for more fishing farms. It has a really negative impact on the world, and that's just the seafood industry. I mean, certainly cows and pigs and chickens, those also have a pretty big environmental footprint.
That's right.
So I think it's a good thing to pursue and something that'll be more important for us. But then there's like kind of this little icky factor that I feel when I think about eating something that was grown in a lab. It does seem unnatural and just a little bit strange.
Yeah, absolutely. Garrett, as someone who loves to cook, would you be open to cooking with these kinds of meats and eating them yourself? Or just how do you feel about that?
I feel very open to it. I think there's a ways to go before it ends up in most people's kitchens. As we'll talk about soon, the cost is very prohibitive. And as we talked about before with this shrimp, they're only making these kind of clumps of sort of ground shrimp to be able to have something that could work with a lot of other dishes as a chef is something very different as well. So I'm very open to it. I have no problem with eating these things, but I think practicality still has a ways to go.
Absolutely. I saw something of Dr. Sriram talking to, she was doing an interview with a lady in Singapore talking about taking her lab-grown shrimp to a chef and having them prepare it in some different ways. Usually, I think this was a situation where they were making the shumai again. And to the chef, it was very interesting. She talked about working with it, tasting it. Apparently, to the chef, she couldn't tell the difference. She thought it was real shrimp.
Well,
and
it is real
shrimp. It is
shrimp.
real shrimp. That's the thing. It is real shrimp, right? But it just happens to be like this specially made shrimp, lab-grown shrimp. But as Garrett mentioned, the cost is still prohibitive. Researchers have been able to drive down the price of this cell-cultured meat from nearly $300,000 that it cost to produce the debut patty. That's referring to the test tube burger, one of the first kind of attempts to roll this kind of thing out. And they've driven down the cost, but still, these shumai are still about $300 a piece. So obviously, you're not just going to walk into a restaurant on a Friday night and order some shumai for $300 a piece.
Not even at a fancy restaurant. That is really expensive.
That's really expensive. Now we're going to stop there for now, because tomorrow we're going to go right back into this conversation and talking about some of the implications of lab-grown meats. And I'm very excited to have my panelists here back with us tomorrow, and all of you listeners to join us as we continue that conversation. But until then, please do check out our advanced YouTube channel. Check out some of the videos we have. Look at some. Pay attention to whenever our radio programs are released, so you can keep practicing your English. And until next time, I'm David.
Hannah.
And I'm Garrett.
And we're saying goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye.